everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving into a topic that always seems to get people talking, you know? It's this idea that science and faith are like these two things that just can't coexist. Like if you embrace one, you have to automatically reject the other, especially when it comes to Christianity. So to help us unpack all of this, we're going to be checking out some really interesting thoughts from chapter 6 of The Reason for God by Timothy Keller. Have you had a chance to read it yet?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's a good one. Keller always has a way of, like, really getting to the heart of these big questions, you know?
He really does. And I think before we even jump into the specifics, it's important to say that even if Christianity isn't really your thing, which is totally fine, the questions that Keller is raising about like science, reason, the idea of belief itself, those are things that really resonate far beyond any one religion. So no matter what your background is, I think there's going to be some serious food for thought here.
Yeah, absolutely. This is like universal stuff we're talking about.
Exactly. So one of the big questions that Keller tackles right off the bat is this idea of miracles. In a world where we've got all these incredible scientific discoveries happening all the time, how can someone, especially someone who's really into science, how can they actually believe in the kind of, supernatural events that you find described in the Bible? It almost feels like these two completely different ways of looking at the world, right?
Yeah, right. It's like, where's the common ground?
Exactly. But here's where Keller, I think, brings in a really interesting perspective. He's not denying the power of science at all, and I don't think anyone really is at this point.
No.
Science is amazing at investigating, what we call natural causes, but Keller's point is that it's a giant leap to go from there to saying that only natural causes exist. Like that's the only way to explain anything that happens.
It's like saying that that the only things that are real are the things that we can see and touch right now.
Yes.
There could be a whole universe of stuff happening that we don't even have the tools to detect yet,
Exactly. And Keller uses this analogy that I absolutely love. He talks about picture someone who's lost their keys, right? And they're searching for them under a streetlight. And someone comes up to them and says, "Well, why are you only looking under the streetlight? Your keys could be anywhere." And the person says, "Well, yeah, but this is where the light is."
Yeah, I've heard that one.
Yeah.
Classic.
Right. And Keller, he actually borrows this from the philosopher Alvin Plantinga, so it's a pretty well-known analogy in these circles. But the point they're making is that, just because we can only clearly see certain types of explanations doesn't mean those are the only explanations that are out there. It's like that person looking for their keys. They're looking where it's easy to see, not necessarily where the answer actually lies.
It's about remembering that our viewpoint is always limited, isn't it?
Exactly. And I think what Keller's getting at is we have to be careful not to mistake our limited view of the world, even if it's a very scientifically informed view, with the total picture of reality. It's almost like, it's just this assumption that if you accept evolution, then you're somehow rejecting God.
Yeah, like those two things can't even be in the same sentence together.
Right. And you even have like these big names, people like Richard Dawkins, who are really out there pushing that viewpoint.
Yeah, he's definitely a strong voice in that camp.
For sure. But Keller pushes back on this idea, and I think he brings up some really important points. Like he reminds us that even the Catholic Church, which is like the largest Christian denomination in the world, they officially support the idea that evolution and faith are compatible.
Yeah, I didn't realize they were fully on board with that.
Yeah, it's not like it's this fringe idea like some people try to make it out to be.
Right, exactly.
And to drive that point home, Keller brings up this great example. He talks about Francis Collins, the geneticist who headed up the Human Genome Project.
Oh, yeah, I know who you're talking about.
So Collins is a devout Christian. Like he's very open about his faith, but he also fully embraces evolution. And Keller's point is that it's just not this simplistic conflict. There are multiple models for how, if you believe in a God, for how God might work through the process of evolution.
And that's a really important distinction, right? I think a lot of times we get so caught up in the science of evolution itself that we forget to zoom out and look at the bigger picture.
What do you mean by that?
Well, like Keller kind of hints at this when he talks about the difference between, evolutionary science as a process, which we can observe in nature, and then what he calls philosophical naturalism.
Okay, I'm with you so far.
So philosophical naturalism basically takes that extra step and says that, only natural laws and forces are responsible for absolutely everything, not just like how planets form or how species change over time, but also, our thoughts, our emotions, even our moral beliefs.
Okay, yeah, when you put it like that, that's a pretty big claim to be making.
It is, and that's what makes this whole conversation so fascinating, I think, for anyone listening. You don't have to have all the answers figured out about the origins debate to really appreciate the deeper questions that are being raised here, like whether you lean towards a more, God-directed creation, or you're into different forms of theistic evolution, or even if you're coming from a completely naturalistic perspective. The key takeaway is that there's space for thoughtful engagement with these ideas without just automatically shutting down either science or faith.
I like that. It's more about the conversation and less about, feeling like you have to choose a side and stick with it no matter what.
Exactly.
So we've talked about miracles, we've talked about evolution, but what about like the perception of scientists themselves? It's like we always get stuck in this like science versus religion narrative, like it has to be one or the other.
Totally. Like, you can't be a scientist and still believe in,
Hmm.
something spiritual.
Right. It's like that whole science has all the answers kind of vibe.
And the media loves to play that up too.
For sure. But Keller points out that it's not really that simple. Like he brings up all this research both from like when he was writing the book and then going back like 8 decades earlier. And it shows that a significant percentage of scientists, they actually hold religious beliefs.
Really? Yeah. I mean, you don't hear about that very often.
No, you don't. But it kind of goes against that whole stereotype, that all scientists are atheists.
Yeah, you're right. It totally does.
And Keller quotes this sociologist, Peter Berger, who talks about how we often underestimate, like, how much our social context shapes what we end up believing.
That makes sense.
And that's true even for scientists, right? Like, their work might be all about objectivity and data and all that,
Right, right.
but it's not like they just leave all of their personal experiences and influences, like, at the lab door?
Exactly. And it kind of reminds me of what Keller said about the whole evolution thing earlier.
Yeah, how so?
Yeah. Well, it's like just because someone accepts the science of evolution doesn't automatically mean they're rejecting, like, the idea of any kind of higher power or anything
Yeah,
like that.
there's still room for different interpretations.
Exactly. And I think that's something that often gets lost in these discussions.
Absolutely. Well, hey, on that note, I think we've done some serious deep diving today. And, as always, we just want to say thanks to everyone for listening in. We love having you along for these conversations.
Yeah, thanks for letting me pick your brain about all this stuff. It's been fun.
Always a pleasure. And to everyone listening, keep those questions coming, and we'll catch you next time for another deep dive.